Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to Tuesday Tea with Elsa, and in this case we've got Ari over my left shoulder and a Cassio on my right shoulder. So every Tuesday I invite you to join me for some tea time. If the weather's good, we sit out in the paddock with the horses and we talk about something that has been going on this week. Often some of you will send me a request or an idea or a subject to talk about. Sometimes it's something that's come up in my own training during the week. I like all the variations. So this week's Tuesday Tea is inspired by an article that one of you guys sent me. And I can post the article in the comments here after we're done. And it's all about the really complicated words and verbiage and understanding we have about positive reinforcement training and negative reinforcement training. And it's very complicated. And some of you love that complicated scientific look at horse training. But I want to present a slightly different angle on it. And that is, while it doesn't have to be wrong or right, the question is it useful? Does it give you what you need to build a better relationship with your horse? And there's a system that I use for helping me understand this and helping me look at it. And that is looking at everything on a spectrum. So that means that if we have a black and white kind of idea, this is good or that is bad, what's in between the two? That's the most useful information, because we live in a very complicated world where things change all the time. Nothing is static. Everything is changing. And when everything is changing all the time, you have to think a little bit about what's useful to me. Hi, Cassio. And so if we put things on a spectrum, if this is bad and that is good, or this is what I want and that is what I don't want, what are all the things in between? If we put it on a spectrum, you can find the piece that is useful to you. And if you find the piece that is useful to you, that's going to be the piece that makes your day better with your horse. And that's what's important to me. So, as I sit here and I drink my tea, I think a little bit about how do I make today the best possible day between me and my horses. And sitting here and drinking tea while they eat is certainly part of it. But we want to think about a spectrum. And I have an example. I have to thank Wendy Murdoch for this. She told me this many, many, many years ago. And it's always stuck with me. And that is, if stress or tension is where, I'm going to see if all of your muscles contract. Okay, so all of them are really tight. And what you have is you have the extender muscles and the contractor muscles all working at the same time to tighten together. Okay, so that's going to be your stress or your tension. And that's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, you have relaxation, where you have neither the extender muscles or the contractor muscles working. You're just like a big bowl of Jell-O, and you don't do anything. And so if one end is relaxation, where none of the muscles are working, and the other end is tension or stress, where all of the muscles are working, what's in between? So in between the high stress or the relaxation is what I would call release. And release is where you can use the right muscle for the job at the time. You can respond appropriately to the situation and use the muscle you need. So if you need to extend your arm, okay, my camera's not far enough away, you can use the extender muscles and you're not using in the contractors. If you need to contract your muscle, you can contract it, but you don't need your extenders. You don't have to use both at the same time. You can use the appropriate muscle for the situation. And that's where you get release. Now, I think a lot of people oversimplify and they call that relaxation. Anything that isn't huge stress or tension is relaxation. And they use a very binary, it's either right or wrong way to look at it. And I find it's just not very useful for me. If I can see the gray area between what I want and what I don't want, or the middle between one extreme and the other, that's where I'm going to get the most successful progress with my horse. So for me, I don't want a lot of relaxation unless my plan is to put pressure on that horse. So if you're going to add pressure to the horse, if you're going to add situations where you bring up the stress, you might want to start where they're pretty relaxed, because then you've got room to grow without it getting overwhelming to them. For me, I really don't want to add a lot of stress or tension to my horses. So I actually prefer to work more in the gray area of release, where they can see a situation, respond to the situation, use their extender muscles or use their contractor muscles, but they don't have to use both at the same time. So a horse that is in a high stress situation is going to be questioning whether it should go to fight or flight or freeze. And because it doesn't know which one is going to save its life, it's going to tighten all of its muscles at the same time. It's going to tighten the extenders, it's going to tighten the contractors, it's going to make every muscle ready to use. That's not a particularly useful state. But somewhere on the spectrum is going to be part of something that's useful for them. Exactly, Christian. We want to make it better from anywhere on the spectrum. So if horses are really, really, really tight, very, very close to fight or flight or freeze, we want to say, well, can we bring that down a little bit closer to relaxation until we get to release? If a horse is very, very relaxed, like a big bowl of Jell-O sleeping on the ground, and you were hoping to go jump some jumps with them, you're going to need to bring that tension up a little bit into release, because they can't jump jumps when they're lying around like a bowl of Jell-O and just sleeping with all of their muscles completely relaxed. So for me, in my training, anytime I read an article that's very, very complicated, I want to take all of that information as possibly very valuable. But for me, I want to look at it in terms of spectrums. How do I see one extreme to the other extreme? And look for the middle area. The middle area is going to be the most useful to me. So every horse is really, really different. Cassio, who I talk about a lot behind me, he tends to be up in that high tone area. He's very quick to fight or flight. I don't do a lot with him. He's not my current project. He's more like a constant entertainment source in the barnyard. He's young. We're mostly giving him time to grow up before we expect much of him. So when I spend time with Cassio, we spend a lot of time lowering his stress, trying to get him in that functional zone where he's more able to use an extender muscle when he needs an extender muscle and a contractor muscle when he needs a contractor muscle, instead of using all the muscles at the same time. Ari here is much more subtle. Okay, he was 8 years old when he came in from the range. He really is very, very slow to trust. Much slower than any Mustang I've ever worked with before. When I got him from the Bureau of Land Management, the wranglers there said, don't take the 8-year-old. Take the 4-year-old. The 4-year-old is going to be so much easier. And I said, yeah, well, that's not really the point. I'm not looking for easier. I'm looking for a horse I'm going to learn a lot from. And so they gave me the 8-year-old. But he is definitely slow to trust. He's quicker to freeze than to go to fight or flight. but I can still feel when I lay a hand on him, and I can feel the tone of his muscles. What part of the spectrum is he on? Is he in the overly relaxed part of the spectrum? Or is he in the overly tense part of the spectrum where the extenders and the contractors are working at the same time? When I am really successful at getting him in that mid-range, when his extender muscles are used appropriately and his contractor muscles are used appropriately and they're not fighting each other, they're not bound up and muscle tight, that's when we can get the most work done. So exactly, Julie, those spectrums, it helps us avoid pulmic thinking. Okay, I'm not really sure what that word is. I'll have to look it up, or maybe you spelled it differently than I'm used to seeing it. But yeah, I can't see your whole comment, Julie. I only get the little top part of the comment when I'm here live, but it's really helpful. I find that when we think in terms of black and white, it really sets us up to fight with each other. I'm right, you're wrong. This is right, that is wrong. If we can think in a spectrum, we can think, how do we make this better? Can we work together to make this better together? So yeah, Christian, Atlas has been really dramatic in helping me look at a spectrum, because he does tend to be so black and white. And it's been a really interesting challenge trying to help him see things in a spectrum the way I see things in a spectrum. It's not we're all gonna die or we're not gonna die. It's maybe it's getting a little better, maybe it's getting a little worse. Can we work together to make it better? Yeah, Jackie, exactly. That gray area. You have a horse that tends to be very black and white. Not exactly like Atlas, but in his own way, he's very dramatic. And when you can help your horse see that gray area and communicate with you about that gray area, the relationship gets way better. Instead of going from everything's good to everything's terrible, the horse learns to communicate, this is getting a little hard for me. Oh, this is getting a little better for me. If there's a communication back and forth between us, then we start to have a more productive relationship. So I guess that's what today's Tea Talk is about. Anytime you get a black and white option, this is right or that is wrong, ask yourself what's between those two extremes. There's probably a lot of middle ground. And it's in the middle ground that you're going to be able to get along with your horse and build a better relationship instead of everything having to be perfect or terrible, right or wrong. That middle area is where a relationship between two beings gets to really blossom, and you can nudge it a little better and a little better and a little better. Yeah, Kristen, exactly. In the gray areas, you can reward more, and you can reward those small focus changes instead of having it need to be perfect before you reward it. You can reward all the little steps on the way to perfect. And that's where your horse is really going to want to work with you. So I will go ahead and post the article that kind of inspired this talk in case you guys want to read it. I think there's a lot of value in it to consider. But as you read it, I would encourage you to weigh the spectrums. Is it possible that there's a lot of value between one extreme and the other? And maybe we don't have to be so black and white all the time. So those are my thoughts for today. Hopefully gives you something to think about as you go into your ride or your session with your horse whenever you see them, or just something to think about in life. It helps me a lot as I'm going through daily life and talking to people and navigating the world. So thank you all, and I'll see you here next Tuesday for tea. Remember, if you have something you'd like me to talk about, send it to me. if it's an article or a theory or a subject, I'd love to give you my 2 cents about it. So thank you all. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next Tuesday.